The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Welcome to Albany County News. I'm Mary Rozak, the Director of Communications for Albany County. In the next 30 minutes or so, I hope you're going to really enjoy the program that you're going to hear about today. Learn something, take it away, maybe even visit what I'm going to talk to you about for, like I said, the next half hour or so. The guest joining me today is Chris Hawver, Executive Director of the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission. Welcome.
Thank you, Mary. Great to be here.
I'm glad you're here. You know, it's so funny because people hear about the pine bush. They may think they know about the pine bush. I live in the pine bush, and
Right.
I know that's going to prompt some people to say, what is she talking about?
Right.
Oftentimes when you hear about the pine bush, you hear about the Carner blue butterfly.
Right.
And appropriately today, I had to wear a scarf with butterflies and beetles and all kinds of things on it. I
Perfect.
felt that was perfect. Let's talk about the Albany pine bush. We're talking about something that I didn't realize until I started researching, really developed back in the glacial period.
Right. So the Albany pine bush is it's an inland pitch pine scrub oak barrens. So what does that mean? It's an inland pine barrens. So we hear about pine barrens, you hear about the New Jersey pine barrens, or the New Jersey pinelands, or you hear about pine barrens in Long Island, Cape Cod. Those are coastal pine barrens. This is inland. Very similar though, all sand base and all based on the last glacial period. So what we had here in Albany was we had this huge glacial lake that ran from basically Newburgh all the way up to Glens Falls. And that was based on all this melting ice. So that lake brought in all this sediment, and that sediment was sorted as it was brought in by this melting water, and the sand became the primary sorted sediment. And as that lake drained, it left behind this sediment, and that was the major building block for the pine bush today. So you have all this sand, just like you would have on the coast, and you have all these sand dunes that are created by the wind, and that's one of the unique aspects that created the pine bush.
So we're talking about like a beachy type sand?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Same kind of sand. So that's one of the things that makes the pine bush so unique is the sand itself and the conditions that sandy soils create. They're very dry, they're droughty, so the plants that actually can grow there have to be adapted to those conditions. And then the animals depend on those plants, so there's rare animals that go along with it.
Sure, we'll talk about some of the animals there in a moment, but you're talking about a very large expanse.
Right.
The pine bush is now, it's 3,200
acres,
right now. So I said I live in the pine bush. I live in Guilderland. Let's talk about the expanse of because
Sure.
it's more than just Guilderland.
Oh yeah, so the pine bush, basically if you look at where the pine bush was historically, you had this huge glacial lake, and you had this sand belt that goes up into Clifton Park and into Saratoga County, but really if you look at the area, you have Albany, you have Colonie, and Guilderland, and it also goes into Schenectady. So where you live was pine bush at some point. Where SUNY Albany was pine bush. Where Crossgates Mall was pine bush. So we have now, like you mentioned, we have 3,200 acres that are protected in this preserve that this commission I work for manages. Overall, there's probably another 2,000 acres out there piecemeal. So one of the things that we're trying to do is look at the remaining open space that's pine bush habitat and put it together. Take that jigsaw and put it together. And that's mainly certainly that's for species movement, from a biology standpoint, but for people. One of our goals, our objectives, and of the law that created us is recreation for people. So people want to be able to go from point A to point B and not have to cross a highway or stop or whatever. So that's one of the things that we're trying to work on too.
Okay, we're talking about, I'm going to grab my water. Feel free to grab your water too. We're talking about all the sand and sandy beach, and I'm getting dry in my throat. I'm going to take a sip in just a moment. But I do want to talk about probably the most visible, as you said.
Sure.
People are probably familiar most with the area around 155.
Right.
particularly between Colonie, Albany, and Guilderland.
Yep.
Old State Road, West Old State Road,
Yep.
and the Discovery Center.
Yep.
So before we talk about some of those specifics, you did mention the very different animals
Yeah.
that actually call the Pine Bush home.
Sure.
I know in Guilderland, I see fox.
Oh, yeah.
I see deer. I had turkeys on my deck in my backyard.
I'm sure.
About a year and a half or 2
Right.
years ago. Tell me about some of the other creatures that might inhabit the pine bush.
Well, there's a number of plants and animals that are very rare that call the pine bush home. Probably the most popular or common one that we hear about is the Carner blue butterfly. So the Carner blue butterfly, federally endangered butterfly, but there's over 52 other rare or endangered plants and animals that call the pine bush home. We have things like a spadefoot toad. So here's a toad.
What is a spadefoot toad?
That has its rear foot, looks like a spade, so it digs itself into the sand to burrow,
Okay.
and then it hibernates in the sand.
Okay.
So they have these unique adaptations for the habitat in which they live. We have hog-nosed snakes. So we have a snake that's non-poisonous, but they also call it goes by the name of puff adder. So when it's threatened, it puffs up like a cobra, but it's harmless.
Wow. That's a little scary.
A little scary, but they don't bite, and they're harmless. And remember, what snakes are good.
I know. Up here, I know that. We just had a conversation the other day with snakes.
You don't need to pick up snakes, though.
No.
But there's lots of the pine bush is probably some of the greatest diversity in the pine bush are birds.
Okay.
And we do a lot of research work on birds. We're a New York State bird conservation area and a National Audubon important bird area. Because of the bird habitat that we have. So it's breeding habitat, and it's also habitat when they migrate. So we have science staff that we work with. Our science staff work with other scientists, I should say, and we do banding. We actually capture birds in nets,
Okay.
and we band them.
Oh, you mean put a band on their
leg,
okay.
right? And you have to be highly trained and certified to do that.
Okay.
And we're part of this MAPS program, MAPS.
Okay.
So it's measuring avian productivity and survivorship. So there's these stations around the country and into Canada and Mexico and the Caribbean that monitor these birds.
Okay.
So we're part of this whole thing, and it looks at how successful they are in breeding habitat and things like that. It's pretty interesting stuff.
Wow, that's something I did not even know.
No.
So when we're thinking about, the pine bush, it's wonderful to look at, but I know that it's more than just seeing this protected space. I mean, you actually encourage people to enjoy the habitat. So let's talk about some of the things. There are trails.
Yep, there's over 20 miles of marked trails. We have these new maps that we recently produced. So we have 9 different trailheads around the preserve, and there's a map for each trailhead that shows that area with the trails close up, and on the other side is the entire trail system.
Yeah. So if you want to just hold that up and just for a moment, just hold it still so we can actually see that. No, you can just hold it towards me, and I think probably we can grab a shot of that if we hold still there for a second. And I'm assuming because I have actually looked at, we can keep that up there. I've actually looked at the website that there are the trail maps up on the website.
Yes. So these are available in the Discovery Center, which we can talk about in a minute if you'd like.
Sure.
But these trail maps are at each trailhead. They're in the Discovery Center for people to use, and they're also on our website.
Okay.
So most people these days go on the website just to see where they are, and some people carry them.
And I should say the website, by the way, is wonderful because it gives you really a sense of the history of what has come to pass in order for the pine bush to exist, and then brings you right through to the present with complete calendars. So there are trails. The one thing, I have quite a few friends that go on the trails, and they've said you need to make sure though. There are ticks in certain, and you have to make sure you're covered. That's probably a good caveat.
It is. So we have these trails. We have over 20 miles of these marked trails, and we do our best to keep the vegetation cut back from those trails. So if you stay on the marked trail, you're pretty well off. If you have a dog you're walking, keep your dog on the trail. Or check. But even if you go into the pine bush, And frankly, if you go any place in any open space area, if you go to Thatcher Park,
Right.
if you go to Grafton, if you go to any place, check yourself for ticks. I live in Rensselaer County, and there's ticks everywhere. So there's information at every trailhead, that gives you, precautions to take. Make sure you wear long pants, or if you don't, just make sure you check for yourself. But it's a reality, and unfortunately, the pine bush is so well known for it. But it's probably because it's one of the few more wild open spaces that people really recreate in, compared to the Corning Preserve or Washington Park. Ticks aren't so much of an issue where you have a lot of mowed grass.
Sure.
When you have an area that's natural open space, it's more common.
Got to be careful. There are many ways to access those trails
Yep.
and to get in. I know
Yes.
whether it's through like Pitch Pine Road, right off of
the Dunes housing development.
Right off the Dunes housing development. I know is one way, right off of 155, or if you go to the Discovery Center. Are those some of the most popular ways to access?
I would say the most popular site is right from the Discovery Center. That's Carner Barrens East. That's this trail map, but also off of Western Avenue on Willow Street. Willow Street
okay.
dead ends,
Yep.
and that's a trailhead that a lot of people use because it's more remote.
Okay.
So it has less, I guess, person traffic.
Sure.
A lot of people there mountain bike, because the preserve is open it's a multiple use area.
Okay.
You can hike, you can mountain bike, you can ride your horse, you can hunt.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a little bit. Sure. You can ride your horse.
You can ride your horse.
I can't believe I let that go by. You can ride your horse.
Sure. Actually, one of the things about the pine bush is equestrians like to ride their horse in the pine bush in the spring because it's so sandy, it dries out quickly.
Okay.
If you want to ride your horse in April in this area, it's all mud.
Sure.
So they ride most often in the springtime.
That's funny, and they're actually right near Willow of Route 20. There actually is, I know, a stable.
Yep, that's right.
Not far from there. I'm going to take a minute before we talk more and remind everyone that we are talking today with Chris Hawver, the Executive Director of the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission. The Willow Street access is something was not aware of, and to let everyone know who may not be familiar, Willow is right off of Route 20 in Guilderland.
That's right.
Near that newly renovated fire
Yes.
station. I should point that out. So that's it. I'm going to have to check that out. That entrance there. Hunting.
Yep.
I got to tell you, and I've used the term when we talked about snakes. Thinking about hunting when people are walking on trails and in the pine bush, that definitely freaks me out. And I know that that there have been some people who've talked about it, others at the same time who talk about the particular nature of the type of hunting that's done.
Sure.
Let's talk, if you could explain, I believe it's bow hunting.
Yep.
That's allowed?
There is. You actually can hunt with a firearm too.
Can you? Okay.
With a shotgun only, and it's all closely regulated by New York State, by DEC. And there are some further restrictions in the pine bush. Most of the hunting that occurs is archery. It's bow hunting, and bow hunters hunt for big game, for deer, and it's a traditional activity, recreational activity for people, but it's an important ecological function for the preserve, because if you have this massive open space area that's surrounded by development, you're going to have overpopulation.
Right.
And that's why we have hunting now that's as regulated as it is, because we're the ones who created the mess, basically. So we've impacted habitat, so then we have overpopulation, and hunting helps deal with that population.
Talk about the safety of that, because when I think about that, are there certain areas in the preserve for hunting, or how are those who are walking through on a trail protected? I mean, do you recommend that they wear during certain seasons?
No, I mean
it's
archery is a very safe activity. Archery hunting. The information's on our website when hunting seasons are. There's a brochure at the Discovery Center. There's information at each trailhead. That's why it's important when people go into the preserve. If your backyard is at the edge of the preserve, you shouldn't access the preserve that way.
Gotcha.
You should go at a trailhead, because that's our main source of education for the public, so people know.
Okay.
And if you're uncomfortable when it's hunting season, you may not want to visit.
Sure.
But I would encourage people. It's a very, very safe activity, and the fact that the hunters that hunt in the pine bush are concerned about public perception. They're particularly respectful of other recreational users.
Sure.
And they're usually there. They're there very early morning when other people are not, or they're there at dusk when other people are not.
It's a good point. So people can go in there basically at any time. There are
It's open.
Okay.
Yep, it's open 24/7. You can anytime you want.
Okay.
Yep, you just have to follow the regulations.
And I am aware, as we start talking about the Discovery Center and other programs that are offered, I am aware that there are programs sometimes where people can go in at night. There are organized tours.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I think I saw something about maybe owls
Yep.
at one point. Let's talk about some of those offerings from the Discovery
Sure.
Center. And
so we have this we have a 6-month program guide that we put together. This is the second time. We used to do them 2 months at a time. So now we've gotten a little smarter.
Okay.
So we do public programming, and particularly when we have like school breaks. So school break in February or April or over the December holiday. We have a lot of programs because a lot of families want to go someplace.
Sure.
Someplace that's either inexpensive or free. So, like, for example, during February break, we have sometimes 2 programs a day, and some of them are during the day, some of them are in the evening. So the one that you mentioned, the Owl Prowl, we call it an Owl Prowl. So we do a program, our education staff, we have environmental educators, we do a program inside, introduce people, families to what owls may be found in the pine bush, and then we go out and we listen for them, or we call for them.
Okay.
And we do the same thing with coyotes. So we do a coyote walk, we talk about coyotes, and then we go out into the preserve at night, with a group that's led, and listen for coyotes and call for them too.
do you see them?
No, you'll hear them.
You'll hear them.
Right.
Okay.
You'll hear them call.
Interesting. Now, the coyote, I hadn't thought about that. Wow, one of the other exotic animals. When you're talking about no admission or free versus low cost, let's talk about the Discovery Center. Are there charges for different things?
So the Discovery Center is free. And the Discovery Center is open every day, Sunday through Saturday, except for major holidays. And the programs that we do in the center or on site, they're either a small cost or sometimes they're free.
Okay.
So it's $3 a person or $5 a family unlimited. So if you have a family of 9 people, bless your heart, it's $5.
Okay.
And it's interesting to see, we opened the center in 2007. So when we had the crash in 2008, our visitation increased significantly because people didn't have the disposable income.
Sure.
So instead of going to the movies or whatever where it cost more, they were coming to the Discovery Center. But one of the programs that we do that's free is we have this ongoing program called Pine Bush Pups. So they're preschoolers.
Okay.
So we've had 2 of those this past week, and we have the best is called Pups on Snowshoes. So you put these 3-year-old children on these tiny snowshoes.
Okay.
And it's adorable.
I can imagine it would be.
Because they can't walk as it is, so
that's-
but they love it because it's a novelty, and
Sure.
the moms or dads are with them. Gets them outside, and everybody learns something, and it's a good time.
Well, Pups on Snowshoes is a little challenge this winter.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
How
it
does
is.
how does that impact if you have the brochure done 6 months in advance? Obviously, the lack of snow probably has impacted some of the programs and
Right.
called for changes.
Right. So if it's a snowshoe program, and a snowshoe program usually is not just let's go for a walk in the pine bush on snowshoes. There's something interpretive. Let's go out and learn about winter ecology, or where do salamanders and frogs go, in the winter. So you just do it on snowshoes. So without snow, we go for a winter hike.
Okay, interesting. Now we've talked about the sandy, really makeup base of the pine bush. Are there areas with water? I mean, these animals need to survive.
Yeah.
So I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah. So the pine bush is. So you have the major building block is all this sand, and then you have these really deep ravines, these ravine habitats. So there's streams, and so those are the wetlands, and then there's also vernal ponds. Okay. So these ponds that dry up or semi-dry up in the spring or in the summer, and they're wet in the spring, and they're very important for breeding. They're breeding habitat for reptiles and amphibians.
Okay.
And they're important for birds. They're important. So they're part of the overall system that helps it function. The one thing I didn't mention is the interesting thing about the sand dunes with the pine bush is that we were recognized last year as a National Park Service National Natural Landmark, an NNL, because of not just the ecology, but the sand dune system.
Okay.
So that was a big feather on our cap, and it's one of the things that people
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're very proud. But it's one of the things that people didn't really realize because of the sandy soils and the sand dunes.
Mm-hmm. Well, geez, I'm learning all kinds of things along with our audience today. Everything, while it may be free for folks who come in or a nominal charge, everything costs something.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the nature. You're not a typical nonprofit.
Right. We're not a nonprofit. So we're a New York State public benefit corporation. So we were set up by state law in 1988. So the legislature created and established this Albany Pine Bush Preserve. So there's the Albany Pine Bush. That's the habitat. That's the ecosystem. And recognizing how important it is, the state created this preserve to be able to protect that land, and a commission, the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission, to manage that preserve. So we were created to oversee and protect and manage the Albany Pine Bush Preserve and provide the public with recreation and educational opportunities. That's basically our mission. So we're a quasi-government agency. We're a state authority. So we're subject to the state authority requirements. I always say to people, well, we're like the throughway authority, but like that big.
Okay. How big is the staff?
We have a staff of 19 currently, full-time, permanent. I'm sorry, permanent, because we have 4 part-time folks that work at the Discovery Center as visitor services, and then we have in the field season we have another 12 seasonal staff that work for us, either as interns or seasonal staff, that do everything from trail work to help with prescribed burning, which
we'll talk about in a moment. Yep.
Which is an atypical way to manage habitat, and certainly in this area. We have people that do scientific work. They do monitoring of the butterfly. They monitor certain types of plants. They monitor, right now we have seasonal staff monitoring frost pockets. Looking at these different areas between the tops and the bottoms of the dunes actually have different temperatures, and we're looking at it. Will there be a change with a change in climate? Okay. So it's trying to tie in all these different things.
Sounds like almost a very eclectic kind of staff, the makeup of,
it is.
what you
right.
have.
I mean, you have conservation science staff, you have stewardship folks, you have environmental educators, you have administrative people, you have visitor services people for the Discovery Center. So there's a whole group, that's that all work on one project, but in different areas.
So you manage the entire, as an executive director, that's your...
Yes. So I oversee the staff, and I deal we have a board that's set up by, and as you know, the county executive is a member of the board. And that board makes the decisions on, the major things that we do, budgeting and annual planning and things like that. Okay.
Let's talk about the prescribed burns, because that's something that I know that some people are familiar with, having living in the area, knowing that every so often, there'll be notices that are out there. You know what? Don't be nervous. You're going to see smoking. You're doing different areas, or not doing them based on winds. I know that sometimes there have been issues with that. Tell me about the prescribed burn and what the intent is when that's done.
Sure. So the pine bush, like I said before, it's an inland pine barrens. All pine barrens are what are called fire dependent systems. So the plants in pine barrens are dependent on fire in some way, and the animals depend on those plants. So they're indirectly dependent on fire. So, for example, some plants can't set seed, they can't reproduce, they can't grow readily without the reduction of canopy coverage for sunlight. So it's basically a force of disturbance that helps the system keep itself healthy, if you will. Kind of like you have habitats that are based on floods. Some areas need to be flooded. Sure. In along rivers and areas like that. So you can't have wildfires naturally anymore, certainly. So what we do is we do these prescribed burns, or we call them controlled burns, and you do a small, readily identified area, and you burn that area to mimic what a natural wildfire would do.
So how long does it take then when you do that for it to regenerate, for that new life cycle to begin?
2 or 3 weeks.
Really? It's that quick?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow,
Yeah,
I
so
didn't
you'll
realize
see.
that.
So for example, if we conduct a burn, say in mid-May, by the end of May, it'll be greening up again
Wow.
immediately. And because those plants are adapted to it. So you'll have,
Sure.
so some plants, like I said, won't set seed. Some plants have seed coats that are so hard that they won't germinate.
Mm-hmm.
The heat from a fire causes the moisture in that seed pod to expand, crack, and then it can germinate.
Wow.
Other plants have adaptations like the pitch pine tree, very thick bark, so if a fire comes through, it insulates the tree so it's not harmed.
Okay.
If the tree were to be consumed in the fire, it'll resprout from the base because the roots are so deep. So there's all these interesting adaptations that go along with it.
I feel like I'm back in school. This is biology class, but this is very interesting.
My master's degree focused on fire ecology.
Wow, it's funny because driving through in an area on Old State Road and seeing looking at the areas that were burned.
Yeah.
And you see that in the trees, but that's why I asked about the regeneration,
Yep.
because you're not necessarily, if you're driving, seeing that happen.
Right, and
at height.
and I think we're getting better, but we can still do better at communicating with the public, because if you see, fire management is not a common practice in the Northeast. It is incredibly common in the southeastern U.S. and the western part of the country. So when people see an area that we've burned recently and it's blackened, it's ugly. To the average person, it's ugly. But as it starts to regenerate, then they realize, it comes back quickly. But we need to do better at helping people understand that it's okay, that it's going to be ugly for a little while.
I'll ask you quickly about this. There was an area on West Old State Road that it doesn't look like it had been burned, but I think maybe last year or the year before, it looked like there was a lot of the trees were being cut down. Is that
Right.
also part of the process?
So basically what we'll do is, prescribed fire is the main tool that we use to manage the pine bush. The pine bush has been in a state where there's issues with invasive plants, invasive trees over the last several decades that have come in and starting to outcompete the native plants. So we remove those trees, or we cut them down and then we leave them and they'll be consumed in the next fire. Other areas that have become so overgrown, if we were to burn, it would be difficult to control the fire.
Okay.
So we go in and we use brush cutters, these big brush hogs, and we mow it, and those plants will resprout after a month, and then we go in and burn it, and it's easier to control.
Wow.
So it's kind of like this whole continuum to get to the point where you can burn and manage the habitat that way.
I've learned so many new things today about the pine bush and the pine bush preserve. Chris, thank you. We could talk for a long time about this, but I would encourage folks to actually go visit. So thank you to Chris Hawver, the executive director of the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission, for joining us today. If you want to know anything more, I would certainly encourage you to go to albanypinebush.org. That's albanypinebush.org on the website. And they're open 7 days a week on a bus route. I've seen CDTA going there, and I think they operate on Sunday as well to that location. Thanks for joining me for Albany County News. I'm Mary Rozak. I hope to see you again soon.